And Weather Wagers is back here for a new week, a new month. Now, I know we technically started October last weekend, but now we're recording into a new month, and that means a fresh start for some teams, maybe not so fresh for others. And we're going to pick up where we left off in just a little bit, but I want to bring in, I'm meteorologist Brett Thacker. We've got meteorologist Dan Tomaso. And Dan, we have a little help this week.
We do have a little bit of help. We have an
audio engineer this week. Here he is, Mr. Dave Shiner, wearing a Penn State hat proudly. Penn State and Eagles fans, so he
blends right in
yeah,
here.
Absolutely. Natural fit.
And probably not a fan of the weather this past week. So that's what we actually want to start with as we sort of go through and review some of the things that we want to get to here with Weather Wagers. Not that we want to give ourselves a pat on the back, but I will.
This is why we did the podcast.
Yeah, we knew that eventually there'd be a tropical storm that would disrupt things, and boy, did it ever, because there were a lot of games, maybe some that we thought would be affected that weren't, and then other games that were more affected than what we thought. I think that we thought a lot of the ACC games were going to be affected on Saturday. Remember, we record this on Wednesdays, so the forecast is just that. It's a forecast. It's several days out. But we thought maybe some of the ACC games were going to be affected. They ended up being okay, and then lo and behold, here this thing comes north. Penn State, what a wash.
What a wash indeed. And not only was it a wash for Penn State, the Eagles ended up with more rain than initially predicted. And then, of course, we talked about the MLB impact. Instead of being an impact in Atlanta, we were talking potentially about the shift in track of Ian, but instead of being an issue in Atlanta, it ended up being more of a Mid-Atlantic factor into New York City. And whether it was D.C., whether it was New York City, major series with consequences of seeding and who was getting in. It became a nightmare.
It really ended up as a debacle, and that was all because of the weather, like we talked about. So take us back. I want to talk a little bit about baseball struggles here. The NL East, which was not really decided going back to last week, they had some outdoor games between the Phillies, the Nationals, the Mets, the Braves. But did baseball handle that well? Because it seemed like a bit of a cluster.
I certainly don't think they did. And I think one of the issues was we ran out of time in the season. So, yes, you could, in theory, postpone games under normal circumstances. But because the wild card round starts this Friday into this weekend, there was only a day extra to play with. So games are still happening today on this Wednesday. There's one extra day before the wild card playoff starts. So when you limit your possibilities there, you're already in a pickle. And the Phillies had kicked a game down the road from earlier in the season, so they had to play a doubleheader no matter what leading into this past weekend with the Nationals.
It makes everything tight.
It makes everything tight.
Of course, that can impact what managers do in terms of rotation and rosters, and you don't want your whole season to come down to that and be impacted by a weather event.
And it affects the entire roster, because if you throw off your pitching staff for those made-up games, whether you're making up a doubleheader or you're trying to just get through to clinch the playoffs like the Phillies were, well, guess what? You want to keep your starters on a 5-day rotation so they're ready for the wild card round. So it became almost hopelessly complicated. If Aaron Nola didn't pitch this past weekend, we would have been in trouble for the wild card round, and even same thing with Zach Wheeler.
I think they got lucky because
they did. There were narrow windows of time.
They got it in, but it really was. I mean, fans were upset. They didn't know what was happening. I think they avoided a nightmare, but boy, it was close.
There's another weird complication to all this, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, but I don't fully understand it. So the business of baseball also kind of got involved. So I always say follow the money.
Yeah.
Well, apparently the Nationals had more say in how those doubleheaders would play out because of the ticket issue.
They wanted the tickets. Now, who's going to show up to see that team? But they still need the money.
And it would be mostly Philly fans showing up because of the potential to clinch.
They can drive down the 95 and go right in there.
It was a weird scenario.
It really was. I say this a lot about things with baseball, but it was not a good look.
No, it was not a good look.
That's where we stand.
But the positive in all of this is an 11-year drought for the Philadelphia Phillies has indeed ended.
And we are going to come back to that. I don't want to rain on your parade here, but I do want to hold that thought because that is, at least for us, a big headline and how exciting. I want to go back, though, and let's review last week with our records, because I mentioned, and as we kind of continue this discussion about the hurricane and the remnants, we thought that maybe these ACC games were going to be impacted. So I took the bait on that. North Carolina, we both got right. Mac Brown coming through. That was a high-scoring game.
It was. I mean, that seems to be the thing now with the Tar Heels. No defense, lots of offense.
Correct. I took the under for Virginia Duke. They ended up having less rain. They scored a lot of points in that game, so I got that one wrong. You had quite a streak going. You took Duke. you had the Clemson win, North
Which
Carolina
they looked
State.
pretty good, too, against North Carolina
did.
State.
And the Wolfpack let me down. We both took the Birds, but that game started out all Jacksonville.
And not only that, with the rain coming down and the wind being down 14 points, seemed like it was 28.
It did, but you know what, though? And I'm going to get into this. I'll save my remind me to hold that comment because I want to go back to that later. The Bills and the Ravens. Boy,
what happened between both teams? I mean, I texted you at halftime saying the Bills are cooked.
Correct.
And it was the Ravens. I think now this is the third week in a row the fourth quarter defense has let them down.
Yeah, that's right. So it was the kind of a push there in a way, but I'm not giving either of us credit. Washington let us down too. Chip Kelly, the chip ship, is back.
Chip is back, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson may be the best quarterback in the country right now. He is hot, looks good.
Yeah.
And that offense, we know Chip is a mastermind. We know that. But
we were starting to wonder, though.
We were starting to wonder, could he put it all together? They've had these undefeated starts before.
Yes.
But they're on a roll. And they could give USC a run for their money. Which,
they have some tough games, but they could.
I mean, how good does the Big Ten look right now? Getting USC and UCLA when they could be in the process of starting something special.
There were a lot of people that joked about that, so that you're right, but they got to keep it going.
They got to keep it going.
Texas Tech, Kansas State, we both got right. I took the over on that. Big 12, and then you had Kansas State. They look pretty solid, too.
They do.
And then, yet again, I had a pretty good week in my best bets segment. The Bengals.
This saved you.
Yeah, the Bengals covered for me there. Tulane. The Green Wave.
The Green Wave.
That was a heck of a football game.
I wish I would have watched more of that one.
And the Lobos let me down. And then, boy, Dano, your Dandies were not so dandy.
They were not so dandy. I might have to reevaluate some things there. But I will say, Ole Miss did end up winning the game.
They did.
Lane Kiffin, man, holy cow. What are they doing down there in Ole Miss? I mean, they seem to be on the cusp.
Well, there's a guy who I think has used the transfer portal to his advantage. He can recruit. And we'll see. They've got some big games coming up, too. Sammy Pittman let you down against Bama.
That I'm very stunned by. It was almost like we got a mirage of the Razorbacks through the first 4 weeks, and now they're coming back to earth.
I think so, but I think they'll be still competitive in a lot of those games. And then the Rams, I mean, I don't know what happened there. You convinced me to take them on Monday night in a different pool just from listening to you, and I thought, they're still the Rams, but I don't know. They haven't been great offensively.
There's something interesting going on, and I can't put my finger on it, whether it is the Super Bowl hangover or are the 49ers a better team with Jimmy Garoppolo.
They might be.
I can't believe I'm saying that, but they seem to be pretty well put together.
So our records as they stand right now, we don't really win or lose anything. We both went 5-5, so I'm still 3 back. But we both have winning records right now, and when you're picking games against the spread and trying to use outside factors like the weather, this is not too bad. 30-22 for you is really, really good. 27-25 for me. So we're both on the winning side. Let's see if we can attack some of these games this week. So, okay, now we come to some more news and notes here. And let's talk about that Penn State game because we kind of predicted that as well, that Penn State would struggle here as they played in a bad weather game because that seems to be a typical occurrence in the James Franklin era.
And I think a lot of it has to do roar, Lions, roar. I think one of the things that unfortunately goes wrong for Penn State in these games is their offense is so about chunk plays. And they focus on this a lot. There's a certain percentage the staff wants to reach every single week. When you're in bad weather, you got to throw that out. You just got to get first downs. You got to keep the ball, time of possession, and they did that, mind you. They did do that in this game, and we'll get back to that in just a second. But I think when you rely on those down-the-field passing plays so much to open up the offense, it can slow you down to a grinding halt in bad weather.
So, they come out, they have a great win on the road at Jordan-Hare, and then they come home and they play less inspiring football, 2 home crowds against Central Michigan and then against Northwestern. So, and see, I already want to forget it.
Yeah.
So, I'm stumbling over.
But this had Illinois written all over it from last year.
It did. And so now it's like, okay, well, what is this? What is this team? Because we're seeing some flashes to years past. But let me be a little more optimistic here.
I was going to say, because I am very optimistic.
Yeah, and I'm a little negative because I thought, no, you know what? If you're a good team, you need to take what you did against Auburn, and you need to come home then and smack around these 2 lesser opponents. Now, you can't do anything about the weather.
No.
But Northwestern is really bad, and I watched them too. They are bad.
Well, and thankfully so because Penn State put up just enough points but turned the ball over 5 times. And you know how many points they gave up on those turnovers?
0. So that's
right. That's huge.
That's huge. That's what could be the difference going forward here. How good does that defense look?
Well, first of all, I don't know if they're as talented as last year's defense because they did lose a lot. However, their scheming, their aggressiveness is different. And again,
the blitz packages look great. They're changing up looks. The line is playing at a high level, the defensive line. And I'll say this much. I like Brent Pry, but we knew when games were tight at the end, there was too much of bend but don't break. And sometimes they broke.
Many times, unfortunately, in the bigger games. And there's no break right now in this defense. And there's not a whole lot of bending either when the game's on the line, from what I've seen so far.
That goal line stand was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that was impressive.
So, we definitely need the offense to stop sputtering.
Correct.
And you can do that when you don't turn the ball over. Even if they scored 2 more times, you take away just a couple of those fumbles. It might have been 31-7. Might have felt better about it. But
here's another point: is the criticism right about Sean Clifford? Because who didn't turn over the ball in this game?
No, he threw a pick.
Oh, that's right. He did throw a pick, but he did not fumble. He did not fumble.
No, he didn't fumble, and he can't do anything about the running backs fumbling. I think the criticism has always been a bit overblown. I mean, he has won some games, but here's the situation again. First of all, that is a game that perhaps in years past Penn State would have lost. We just had the saying that you are what your record says you are. Mm-hmm. If UCLA is 5-0, guess what?
Penn State
is 5-0. But the criticism with Clifford is going to mount along with Franklin and everybody else because now comes the stretch.
This is the big one.
This is the big one. Now, you're going into Michigan in a week, right? This week's the bye. It's a tough environment. We've already proven that this team can win on the road.
And we've already proven last year we gave Michigan one heck of a football game. We couldn't finish.
Harbaugh is somebody that Franklin has beaten.
Yes.
I think the talent is very similar.
I think they're very similar teams. I don't think, the AP ranking is what the AP ranking is. I don't think there's 6 slots in between these two teams. I just don't.
Well, a lot of times there really isn't that between number 6 and number 20.
Correct.
I mean, you're right. Some team, but I just, the offense is really going to prove they can do what they did to Auburn in some of these bigger games.
Right.
Because you are not going to be able to compete if your offense comes out, looks good, and then stalls for 2 quarters.
Correct.
We've seen that too many times, and I worry about that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm one of these guys that thinks, you got to put in Aller. You got to put in Aller.
He'll get his time.
He'll get his time, and I realize he may ultimately be more talented than Clifford, but the experience that Sean Clifford has in calming a team on the road and being there after 6 years, he's the team leader. Now, there may come a moment in the game where you feel like you have to do it. That's game situational dependency. But I'm not going to suggest you throw Aller in the big house on the road right away.
If he throws 2 consecutive picks on back-to-back drives, I would think about it. But I don't see that happening. I truly don't see that happening.
And again, nobody's using the weather as an excuse, but there was bad weather. We said it would probably have an impact. We said they probably wouldn't cover. They didn't.
And they still tried to pass the ball, mind you. And they had some success, even in the bad weather. Harrison Wallace seems to be picking up some steam as a secondary option.
Here's the problem, though. When you look at the pass plays, if you go into some of the stats and dig around, there have not been that many long passes.
Correct. They're still trying to force it down the field, but it's not working.
You've got Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington.
And everybody else. And are we ever going to see Keandre Lambert-Smith again?
So I worry a little bit.
I do.
That we aren't having enough playmakers at the right spots. None of that matters if you can run the ball, I suppose. But I do feel there are reasons that this offense sputters, and it could show up. It could show up next week.
Well, we shall see. And again, the RPO offense makes a difference with the way Penn State does things. It should present a big challenge to Michigan.
Well, okay, we have to move on here, but quick look ahead. Do you think it's going to be a competitive game? Does Penn State have a shot to go into Ann Arbor and pull the upset? What do you think the spread of that game is going to be?
I would put it at like 8, 9.
Ooh.
I think so.
For Michigan?
Yes. Home game, big house.
I'm going to say 4.5.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to write this down.
I see Mr. Shiner. He's agreeing with you.
Okay, you say 8, 9. I'm going to say 4.5.
And I think it also depends on what happens this weekend.
Well, yeah, you know they have to play and we don't, so that's a plus right there. Okay, and they play Indiana, by the way. Now, listen, we have some bad news to talk about.
We do.
Wisconsin. I'm so happy that in one of our office pools I picked Illinois outright.
Uh-huh.
But poor Paul Crest.
That has to be his feeling. Now, we don't know the behind-the-scenes stuff.
And by the way, I don't want to laugh at somebody getting fired, but the point is that these programs are not waiting around.
Well, and here, do you want to know the reason why? I keep going back to this. I'm going to stump on it. The stinking playoff season. If you could allow more teams into the playoff season at the end, this sort of thing would not happen. A Wisconsin guy let go with success in his background.
He did, but here's the cold harsh reality.
And I do agree with this part of it.
Yeah, there's several things. If you look at Wisconsin, first of all, Wisconsin is always competitive, always, and they, in their mind, they're the team in the West, and divisions are going to go away, but they're the team on that side that can get to Pasadena.
Yep.
They can get to Pasadena, and they have. Now, they're always going to be competitive, right? When you put a product on the field in front of your fans that loses to Washington State at home, and then they lose and just get smacked on national TV in primetime to Ohio State.
Correct.
And then you come back home, and you're not competitive, okay?
Against who, of all people?
Against your old coach, Brett Bielema. That's embarrassing.
It certainly is.
That's a problem.
It's about the way you lose, and that's exactly what you're trying to say.
They are no longer competitive, and they've had problems at the QB spot for years, and now you look at this team and recruiting dropping. That's a problem, and then I go back to the early signing period is in December,
and this is huge now.
And I think that's even more impactful than the playoffs. I think that's a fair point, and we're going to see things change with a 12-team playoff. But I think right now the number one reason that we are seeing coaches getting fired in September and October is because these programs need the next guy in place by December. They got to save the recruiting class. They got to make sure recruits know that they're coming. And if things are not going well, if you're getting blown out week after week, you got to get rid of the guy and get the next guy in by December. You no longer have. See, it used to be February was the day.
Used to have more of a window.
So then you could wait till after the season. Now you don't have that window anymore.
Jim Leonhard, former NFL guy, he gets the nod here in the interim. However, isn't the defense part of the problem here?
Well, you would say that. I think they like him, and I think Wisconsin. Now, I would argue too if Jim Leonhard was going to get this job, and many think that he might.
I think he's.
Wouldn't they just name him now to that job? I think you kind of have to just say, let's see how he does.
If you're worried about recruiting, you should name him to the job.
So another coach that we've been talking about all season, and if you follow college football, Brian Harsin is not long for this world. So, is he going to be next? And the question is when. So when are they going to do this? I think there's some school of thought, and I want to pull up the schedule here.
It's a gauntlet.
I think Auburn has a. I think Auburn has a bye week coming up. So there's a couple of schools of thought here. Because
and does the buyout drop by that bye week is the question.
So they play Georgia. They have to go to Georgia, then they have to go to Ole Miss, and then they have a bye week. So the consensus may be they'll probably wait till the bye week. I think if Georgia smacks them around, and they've had some problems, Georgia has, with showing up to games. I don't think they're going to be back at home. This is the South's oldest rivalry. I think they'll show up for this. If Brian Harsin gets blown out, I think they fire him Saturday night.
I think so too. I think he's a loss away from, unfortunately, losing his job too.
Correct. So I just keep an eye down there. That'll be the next job. And then are you still thinking prime time in Auburn
or Georgia Tech?
Yeah, but I mean, who do you think Auburn's going to go to? You think they're going to call Dion?
I think they'll call him. I think he'll take the call.
I don't think it's a good fit, though.
And that's the question. Is he more of a recruiter or is he a coach? And I don't know if we know enough about, Jackson State obviously has done very, very well for what they are.
Yeah.
But if you insert him into a big program up against the likes of Saban, up against your friend Kirby Smart.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, I think he could recruit. I mean, he did steal the number one guy in the class next year, so we'll see. But, I mean, that would be fun. Saban might be nervous.
I think Saban should be nervous. And, by the way, will they ever do an Affleck commercial?
Well, they might. I mean, Saban they exchanged words in this offseason, and they're still doing those. All right, now let's get into the NFL a little bit here and talk about them Eagles.
How about them Birds?
You made a comment, though, about being down 14-0 there. And by the way,
smacked in the mouth.
I want to give you some credit here. You were right, and I'm so happy to see this. Doug Peterson got a standing ovation
Well earned.
Well earned. The Philly fan, they may boo Santa Claus, but we will not boo somebody that won a
Doug,
Super Bowl.
Santa Claus is here. Doug is here.
Yeah.
There's a higher elevation there.
I think that he not only deserves it, but obviously, you win the city, it's only Super Bowl.
He's a good guy.
And he's a good coach, and none of that. He didn't leave because of any of that. There were differences there, and he left.
There were some weird things that went on with the front office when it came to Howie Roseman and how they wanted him to run his team. And he said, you know what? I don't need this. See ya.
See ya. And you know what? That's great because guess who Jacksonville needs? They need a guy like that to come and clean up after failed head coach Urban Meyer left that team in a pickle, and now they get a guy who's the complete opposite type of guy. He's a legitimate human being, and he comes in there and he takes over. And listen, they looked happy.
They looked happy, and they look fast. There's some talent on that team now.
There is
a lot of first and second round talent.
Trevor beat himself, and they were fumbling the ball all over the place. It was bad weather.
That weather was worse than Penn State's.
They didn't give up, though. That's what I liked. But I do want to make a comment about being down 14-0 because I'm sitting there in my living room, and if that had been any other Eagles team, if that had been Penn State, and we lament. My buddy's a Buccaneers fan, but long before Tom Brady got there, we tend to love a lot of losers in these. Not everybody can be an Alabama fan, right? Not everybody can go out there and feel that level of confidence. When Alabama goes down 14-0, you know they're not out of it.
You don't have to worry.
I sat in my living room on Sunday, and I wasn't worried.
Not a care in the world.
I was not worried because I have seen this team play now, and I feel confident that Jalen Hurts has grown. The offensive scheme is perfect. The O-line is doing some really good things. Miles Sanders, Penn State are doing well. Dan, I watch this team, and I feel confident.
I feel confident, and one of the main reasons why I feel confident is the depth. They had major injuries. They lost 2 out of the 5 offensive linemen during the game. No problem. Stick in Jack Driscoll. How about Suo Peta coming into the game? James Bradbury moves over to CB1 once Darius Slay's out of the game.
And I wouldn't feel that way the last couple of years.
No,
it's bad.
And as much as I have lamented about Howie Roseman over the year, I give him credit. They built a heck of a roster.
All right, we need to keep moving here. Any teams a shoo-in for the NFL playoffs? I mean, the Eagles are the only undefeated team right now.
I think the Eagles are a shoo-in. I hate to say this. My buddy behind me is going to like this, but the Cowboys seem to be a shoo-in because they're winning games they shouldn't be winning without Dak Prescott.
They are, and then when he comes back, they could probably win some more.
Correct.
The Giants actually look good to me. We're going to talk about them. I know there's a lot of issues there.
Might be a little fluky.
Yeah, and then, the Packers still look off to me, too.
They look off, but because of who they're playing against,
yes.
I think they're almost a shoo-in. How about the 49ers?
Well, I could
Kyle
see them.
Shanahan?
I could see them cratering, but there's a good coach. Mm-hmm. Can they make it work with Jimmy? It is possible. So I don't know if any team's a shoo-in, but certainly if the Eagles keep winning, they look pretty good.
And then we go to the AFC side. I think the biggest shoo-in of all could be the Kansas City Chiefs.
They look phenomenal again.
Phenomenal.
Yep.
I mean, Andy Reid's got them cooking.
Wouldn't that be a wild Super Bowl? Andy Reid versus the Eagles.
I could see it. I could definitely see it.
It's October 5th. Not that anybody's ever made a Super Bowl prediction this early, but Eagles, Chiefs. Mark it down.
Mark it down.
All right, next up.
I don't think it'll be Eagles-Steelers. Sorry. We'll never get that Pennsylvania Super Bowl, it seems.
No, it's not happening this year. You made a comment on Twitter, and I want to just point it out. This doesn't have to be a long discussion, but you said, all right, now, Clemson looks legit. Here comes Alabama. We've got Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson again. Is there hope for anybody else in the college football playoff? Going back to your argument, we're excited. This is happening. The 12th team is happening. We just don't know when yet. But do you think this is a foregone conclusion this year? It's those 4 teams?
I do. And the only thing that could slow this down is the quarterback injury to Bryce Young. That's the only thing I could see changing this. But I think Georgia's had their scare. Alabama's had their scare. Clemson has had their scare. These coaches are smart enough to get these guys up and ready to go again. I think it's over.
Well,
I really do.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very tough.
As excited as I am about Penn State, they can't compete with these 4 teams day in and day out. It's unfortunate. They're just not there yet.
Yeah, I think so, too. And ultimately, it is going to come down to these elite teams. Georgia has looked mortal.
Yes, Georgia has looked mortal. Obviously, Clemson has too.
Clemson has too, but they look better.
They do look
honestly,
better.
than they looked last year.
But sometimes these bad losses or even close calls end up getting these teams in a better situation.
we're going to have to wait and see on that. But I think you're right. It's going to take a miracle to knock one of them off. And even if they get knocked off, they can work their way back in.
Like the Alabamas of the world that you can lose a game and still get in. But, realistically, for Penn State fans out there, we're close, but we're not there yet. It's been kind of the story of James Franklin's career so far at Penn State.
Yeah, that's why you need a 12-team playoff for the Penn States of the world, and maybe like the UCLAs that are right on the fringe, that they can have a good year, but they're not going to get in that 4-teamer.
The only team, and I'll throw this out here to you real quick, from the Pac-12, if USC goes undefeated, and there is a one-loss Bama, there is a one-loss Georgia.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that goes, and by the way, same deal. I mean, you never know, like in the Big Ten, if there's a one-loss team that doesn't get in the conference game and other things happen, fluky things have happened before, you never know. But, yeah, keep an eye on USC. I agree with you there. Or even Utah.
The Utes.
If they can run the table and win the Pac-12, I know they have that loss to Florida. We'll see what happens. All right, lastly, the Phillies
did it.
are in the playoffs.
We did it.
It is so terrific to be in the playoffs. And, my son and I were celebrating last night, and he didn't understand why I was so happy. I mean, he's happy, too. But
he's never seen a playoff team.
He's never seen a playoff team.
And that's wild.
It's been 11 years, and that doesn't seem like 11 years to me, but it's been that long.
It's been that long.
We associate with a lot of Mets fans,
Be it as it may.
Nobody's perfect. But I will say that I'm happy for them as well. I think it would be, I said to one of my buddies last night, can you imagine on the 29th of October if it's Penn State, Ohio State, leading into the Phillies, Mets, NLDS, depending on how things get seeded. Could you imagine that?
It would be fantastic television. I'd be torn. I would be really torn because we've waited so long to see the Phillies get involved in the playoffs again.
Yeah.
And credit where credit is due. John Middleton said we are ending this drought. They opened up the pocketbooks. They made some big signings this year. Did they all work out perfectly? No. But it's a team effort. It takes 25, 26 guys to make this happen.
And I don't know if we can make a run or not. I think that, again, we kind of like our football teams that we talk about. There are flashes there. Nolan shows up this past week and almost pitches a perfect game.
Correct.
But there's flaws there. You can be a flawed championship team, but you've got to be able to put it together. And my concern with the Phillies still is the bats are alive one night, they're dead the next. The pitching looks great one night, it's dead the next. Can we put it together enough? Because these are some really good teams. The Cardinals, the Braves, the Mets, the Dodgers. I mean, these are some really, really established franchises.
I think now, though, they're playing with house money. They made the playoffs. That is a huge monkey off their back.
It's like it's cathartic.
And I certainly hope the demeanor of Rob Thompson, he deserves to be the full-time manager. He's been calm. He's been collected. He didn't panic throughout this stretch. Maybe internally he did, but he didn't let it show. And that could help in the playoffs.
I want him to stick around. I think Philly should want him to stick around.
I agree.
Gets them to the postseason after Girardi was fired. They go on this run that really, these last couple of months, not so great, but that middle run of the season,
it saved their season.
It did. So that's going to be fun to watch. We do want to mention the forecast for these games going into the weekend. We're going to talk about our football games of the week. The games haven't been scheduled yet as of this recording.
So this is a little bit of an issue to figure out.
And again, thanks MLB, but they are going to be scheduled soon. We know it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Here's the great news. There's not a lot of weather this weekend.
No, it's fairly quiet. So even
Looks
though
like a nice October
this
weekend.
week leading up to the playoffs has been a mess.
Correct.
This weekend should not.
I don't see many weather issues at all for these games. I think they get the weekend in no problem for Major League Baseball. So
I think they do too. By this time next week, we'll know if the Phillies made it on to the next round.
That's good news. All right, let's do our games of the week.
Games of the week.
As usual, we do try to find some weather games. Very tough to do. The weather looks amazing this weekend, which is good stuff.
A lot of dry air building now as the remnants of Ian finally kick out of the region.
Yep. So here are the three that we picked. There is one that could have some weather, and that is the one in Miami. We'll get to that in a bit. Tennessee and LSU, two SEC teams that don't play each other often.
No.
And don't forget our odds are taken from Caesars Sportsbook. We record this on Wednesday, so these may change by the end of the week. But right now, Tennessee, a 3-point favorite on the road. I can understand why LSU has some issues, but what a fun game.
What a fun game in Death Valley. Yeah. So this is not going to be easy for the Vols, and what I fear is that they're looking ahead to Alabama.
Yeah, could be right. However, LSU fans like those night games. They're not in charge. Guess what? You got to wake up early. That's an 11 a.m.
Welcome
kick
to the
Central
Big
time.
Ten, LSU, where we have noon kicks.
Bingo. So we're going to talk about that one. Then North Carolina, Mac Brown goes down to Miami. Miami is favored in this game, and I got to thinking, how on earth is that possible? Miami stinks. They lose to Middle Tennessee State. They lose to a less than stellar Aggie team. Now, I thought, okay, well, they are at home. They've got Mario Cristobal. And listen, I love Mario Cristobal, but he doesn't have the horses yet.
He doesn't have it yet.
And then I thought, hold on a second. Gene Chizik is Mac Brown's defensive coordinator.
You keep going back to this.
Well, that's why they're favored. And I don't know who's going to win the game, but I understand the line, and I will tell you, this is a sneaky one. I think the public is going to be on the dog here, and Vegas knows something, so just keep an eye on that. Could be an interesting game.
Could be
some
the dog.
Could be, yeah, we're going to talk about that. Could be some rain in that game. We'll show you that. And then here's a fun Big Ten one now.
Very fun.
Iowa, Illinois, defensive battle. Brett Bielema again.
If he pulls this off, if Bielema pulls this off, could Ferentz be any type of trouble?
No.
You don't think so?
No, as long as he goes 8-4, he'll be fine.
Which is kind of the typical.
Yeah, so but I do think that's a fun one. So now we go to two NFL games. We've got one in London, the Giants and the Packers. And by the way, kudos to the NFL here. It's not the usual slop they export to the Englanders. This is actually a good, fun matchup.
It should be. It should be. I do think, though, it's a little lopsided.
Packers by 8 in this one, favored by 8, and then the Eagles travel to Arizona. The Eagles don't usually play well when they have to go to Arizona.
I think it's since 2001 they haven't won in the desert. And remember, there was a time when the Cardinals were in our division, which was bizarre.
I do remember. That was a long time ago, but it was. The Eagles are favored by 5 points on the road. So when we talk about the weather here, we go to Baton Rouge first. Again, this is going to be a nice October weekend, 86 degrees.
That's really nice.
They may not want that game at noon or 11 a.m. local time, but that's going to be just fine.
Very
one
nice.
game, Dan, that may have some weather is in Miami.
Yes, and so we'll have to watch for showers and thunderstorms there. And then finally, this is the air moving into the Mid-Atlantic for the weekend. Cool, dry, sunny weather in Champaign, Illinois. Keep in mind, though, temperatures at night in the 30s. So it may be a little chilly there for the tailgaters.
Yes, correct. You're right about that. And so when we look at, again, the setup here, I think Baton Rouge looks dry, but Miami, could there be some showers during the Mac Brown-Mario Cristobal matchup? I think there could be.
Stalled front of some type.
Maybe a sea breeze going on there to add to convection that may cause some lightning. So keep an eye on that. And then, of course, the winds. I don't think the winds will be much of a factor for the early game in Louisiana, but Miami's going to have a bit of a breeze.
Onshore flow, you mentioned that sea breeze, 10, 15 miles per hour.
Yep.
And Miami has quarterback issues, so if weather is a factor, I can't imagine it's going to help them very much.
No, but I think they are playing Tyler Van Dyke,
yes,
right?
Mr. Van Dyke
so
is
he's coming back, even though he's had some turnover issues. And then pop the champagne. Things look great in Illinois as Iowa comes to town, and Brett Bielema he may try to retake the West.
I think they could. I mean, the West is
too.
wide open right now. Northwest breeze, maybe 10 miles per hour at best. Again, a lot of the weather from the Great Lakes region, the Midwest, Northeast, all pretty similar here this weekend.
And then we go to London, some cloudy skies, as this is an outdoor stadium. It's the Tottenham Hotspurs. They're going to be playing.
I can't get used to that.
Me neither, but 63 degrees, kind of a cloudy day as the Giants and the Packers kick things off. That's early local time, 9:30, or our time, I should say, 9:30 in the morning. Local time, I think it's about 2 o'clock. Glendale, Arizona. Of course, they play in a dome. We don't have to worry about the weather, but it's nice. Any Eagles fans that are traveling there, it's going to be sunny and dry.
And they do travel well. Let's go back across the pond, though, to London and show you that some showers coming in from the Atlantic and just bringing in a lot of clouds. I don't think it'll rain during the game per se, but just something to keep in mind that weather could be a factor, that damp air, that damp UK type of weather.
Like we've had.
Right. It'll certainly be in play. And
winds.
The winds coming in from the south and the southwest, 10, 15 miles per hour. That stadium's pretty closed off, though.
Yeah.
I don't know how the wind really affects the kicking game there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, and it's a soccer stadium. It may not. But one of these times we are going to mention the wind, and somebody's going to come down and miss a field goal late, and we're going to say we called it.
Look at that Jake Pinniger kick. It moved because of the wind in that game on the extra point.
Just glad he made it. So let's get to our picks for these games of the week here, and we differ on a lot of these. So, Dan, I'm going to pick Tennessee.
This could be a separator.
I like what Josh Heupel has coming in, and I think they're going to go into Baton Rouge, and I just don't think LSU is quite there yet.
I think they are getting there, and I like what Brian Kelly's doing. He seems to be putting more discipline in place. I think they could be a sleeper in the SEC, even though it's LSU. Are they ever a sleeper? But I think the big thing for Tennessee is they're in uncharted waters for this program, and they have Alabama to look forward to. I think they drop this one.
Interesting. That is going to be a fun game. And Brian Kelly reminded Paul Feinbaum this week on his program. I know Hendon Hooker. I remember him from Virginia Tech. So you may be onto something there. North Carolina, Miami, we differ on this one. I just think North Carolina's defense is putrid, and I think that Vegas knows something here.
Yeah, it is a little weird, but I'm going against Vegas. I'm picking Mac Brown.
A lot of dogs howling for you.
A lot of dogs howling. Now, this next one, you and I both agree because it's Iowa. Let's face it.
It's Iowa, and I like what Bielema has got going. He gets to go back home, so I think they can cover the 3.5. And, the under is 35.5, as we showed you earlier. We're both going to take the under here. I think it might be something like 24-10.
I think it's going to be.
And it's going to be close.
Your typical Joe Paterno era Big Ten football.
There you go. Giants-Packers in London. Again, we differ on this. I think that Brian Daboll's going to give the ball to Saquon, keep it out of Aaron Rodgers' hands.
Okay.
8 is a big number.
8 is a huge number. I was surprised by that.
And by the way, not impressed with the Packers.
I'm not impressed either, but I'm not impressed with Daniel Jones. I'm not impressed with the wide receiving core for the Giants. They kick a lot of field goals. That could be where this line's coming from. I'm taking the Packers -8.
Okay, and then we're both we're not going to be homers here, but we do both like this team, the Eagles, covering in the desert. Because again, look at the intangibles here. Could we be wrong? We could be.
We could be.
But I'm willing to pick against the Eagles. I did the week on Monday Night Football. Remember that. I'm just saying I don't mind picking against them.
And they're not going to go 17-0. They're going to get tripped up at some point.
But this week I do like 5 is not that big of a number. They're playing well.
They may set the record for second quarter scoring, which is just wild stuff. But Brett, these are our must-see games of the week. How about we take a look under some things? How about we go
under the radar?
And as you know, this game is usually one that not everybody's talking about, but one that we kind of want to keep an eye on. How about Purdue at Maryland? Sneaky good game. Maryland better than average this year. They kept up with Michigan. Meanwhile, Purdue knocks off Minnesota last week in a game not many people saw coming.
And I watched a lot of that.
Did you?
Purdue looked good. Aiden O'Connell, true to form. I mean, he's a pro.
Yeah,
he is a total pro.
He was injured. He came back.
Yes.
Played very well. Now, Ibrahim was out for Minnesota. But I will say, again, we knew Purdue was good-ish, and so Penn State got that win on the road. But now this team they have to travel to Maryland. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what's going to happen here.
I don't either. I will say this much, though. Maryland still has more playmakers than Purdue.
Yeah.
I do believe that. So I think this will be close. I also think Purdue plays up in these games a little bit better than, say, the home team. Temperatures should not be a factor. Weather should not be a factor for this game. I think really northwest winds, a lot of sunshine, so don't have to worry about that.
Classic fall October day in College Park, which is nice. So our under-the-radar pick, that is a noon Big Ten game. I don't have a good feeling on who's going to win. There was a time where you couldn't spell Mike Loxley without 11 L's, but that time is gone. So now he is back at Maryland. I think he's got the goods, but I like Purdue, and I think, like you said, with Aiden O'Connell, you can get in there. I do think it could be a high-scoring game. You got Tua's little brother throwing. You got Aiden O'Connell. So I'm not going to make a pick other than the over. Give me the over here.
And I'm going to pick Purdue, and I just said why. They've proven already they can go on the road, win a game like this. They just did it.
Yes.
And so I think Purdue could take hold of the West here because, again, those 2 losses that they've already incurred are not West losses. That's a big deal.
It's a fun division to keep an eye on.
It certainly is. But we're also keeping an eye on some of your picks.
All right, it is time for...
Time now for Brett's Best.
Okay, here we go. Now, I've had success in this segment the last few weeks.
You picked up some ground.
It's been keeping me afloat. So we're going to run through these pretty quickly. How about Shane Beamer going to Mark Stoops? Kentucky is favored by 10.5 at home. That's a 7:30 kick. A fun one. I think Kentucky has an edge here. And then, Dan, of course, this was supposed to be a headline game this weekend. It
was.
You had Texas A&M on the recruiting trail, all of their fans boasting about how great they were. They beat Alabama last year in a pretty big upset. Then you had that war of words back in May between Nick Saban saying that Texas A&M bought all their players and Jimbo saying Nick Saban's a narcissist and go dig up his past and who knows what you're going to find. And then, so this was supposed to be a good game. Well, guess what? Jimbo.
What happened?
You lost to App State. You choke one away to Mike Leach, and it's going in the wrong direction.
It's going very much in the wrong direction. However, Jimbo just pulled this off last year. We cannot forget that.
In a similar scenario, by the way.
Yes, they had lost 2 straight going into their matchup against the Crimson Tide, and they ended up pulling out a win. So, Jimbo may know enough about what Saban does, being a former assistant himself.
Well,
to me, this line kind of stinks. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I like it, but I'll tell you why. But by the way, they both had press conferences, and they were asked about, Saban was asked about Bryce Young's health. Keep that in mind, too. And Saban's like, I'm not going to, do you want me to call Jimbo? I don't talk to Jimbo much, but you want me to just call him and tell him what I'm going to do? And then meanwhile, somebody asked Jimbo something, and Jimbo's like, well, what do you want me to do? Call Nick? Should I just call Nick and tell him what I'm going to do? So those two have a history together. They think alike, and they're
their
speaking alike. Yeah. So then I'm going to go Texans-Jaguars, a terrible game. But I am not. This segment is not about the type of game. It's about winning.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And so, again, Jaguars -7. That seems like a small over-under, though.
It is, but I'm not going to play that. We'll get into my picks on this in just a bit, but let's go to your games.
Yep, let's go ahead.
It's Doppler Dandies.
So I'm surprised at this point we haven't talked about this game. This is the game that Game Day is featuring. It's TCU and Kansas, 2 probably unexpected, undefeated teams. Someone has to leave this game with a loss, and someone has to leave this game with potentially the Big 12 championship in mind.
Yeah.
This could be huge.
Pull up our overhead camera because we got a Jayhawk fan right here.
But that's basketball. Okay?
I don't know. You got to love what Lance Leipold's doing now.
No. But I mean, Reese
Davis and the game. Reese Davis has probably been there a lot for basketball.
Yep, Lawrence, Kansas.
Never been there for football. You're going to make a pick on that one, and then how about the Pac-12?
Yeah, Pac-12. I love what I'm seeing out of UCLA. This line doesn't make sense to me how Utah is favored against what UCLA just did this past week. Again, 5-0 start for the Bruins. And then finally looking ahead to the NFL, I don't know what the Buccaneers are right now. You mentioned the Packers not looking right. Something looks a little off there in Tampa, and Brady doesn't look as sharp. Could this finally be the season where things start to trail off a little bit?
It certainly looks that way,
yes.
But they're getting some guys back.
They are getting
Godwin's
some guys
coming back. They had Mike Evans back, so maybe they can work some things out.
We will have to wait and see. But
Okay.
let's go ahead. Let's put a bow on this bad boy and show our...
Yeah, cue up our final picks there.
Final picks.
All right. This is going to be a fun week because we differ on a lot of these.
We certainly do.
Yes.
But I think we're all in the same reasoning for each of our decisions.
Yeah, I think so too. Tennessee and LSU, we differ on that. This Miami-North Carolina game, I may want to make a side wager on.
Okay, let's hear it.
I got to think of it as we sit here because that game to me, Gene Chizik, it's going to be like 42-30. Miami.
And you do have to wonder what Vegas is thinking on this. So
yeah,
there is something weird going on here, that is for sure. Where you and I both agree is the Illinois game. We're taking Illinois to win. We're picking the under, which, again, for many reasons makes sense. You seem to be a believer in Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones. I can never pick Daniel Jones when the other option is Aaron Rodgers. I just can't do it.
Well, listen, I agree with you, but, I'm picking Saquon Barkley. I'm not picking Daniel Jones. How about that?
All right.
Okay. Eagles look good to us. I'm going to take the over in the under-the-radar matchup, Purdue and Maryland. You're going to stick with Purdue.
Yep.
And then here come my best. This week, Kentucky. I think Mark Stoops goes back home.
Will Levis has to pick things up.
Shakes off the loss to Ole Miss. And, again, if there's ever a team to welcome in, it's the Gamecocks. They're going to probably blow them out of the water. 10.5 is fine. And listen, I know that number is big for Nick.
It's big.
I don't care. They're at home. Nick Saban heard everything Jimbo Fisher said about him. Say your prayers for Jimbo, because there's no hope he survives this.
I wish
and I don't mean he won't be fired. I'm just saying it's going to get brutal.
I really wonder, though, the Bryce Young factor. We don't know much about the backup quarterback.
Well,
it's a 5-star.
Yep.
I'm sure fabulous, better than anything I've ever seen before. It's Alabama.
And you're right. Maybe I'm not being smart here. Saban's out for blood, and he'll get it. Jaguars, then Peterson goes back home with Trevor Lawrence. The Texans are terrible. I write in the column again. I'm sorry, it's Lovie Smith.
Yeah,
I like Lovie, but his head coaching record is abysmal.
And the franchise is kind of a joke at this point. The Texans just can't get.
And the Jaguars look like they're having fun. So
And
Give
Trevor
me
looks
that
better.
number.
Trevor looks
Yep.
more like himself, unlike last year. Real quick, I'll say I'm taking Kansas. I like what they're doing. The Fighting Lance Leipold's.
Yep.
I take UCLA with the Fighting Chip Kellys.
There you go.
In the
Okay.
in the money line, and then finally I take the Falcons to at least cover. I think the Falcons should keep this closer than people think because I don't see Tampa running away with this. I just don't see enough weaponry on the offensive side for them to run away with the game.
Yeah. So the Falcons are going to keep that close there. And that's a divisional game, so they kind of need that.
Yes, and they're 2-2. I think so are the Buccaneers. So I think this game has the potential of being pretty darn good.
And just to go back to the UCLA pick, remember, Utah's favored by 4.5. You're not picking them to cover that. You're saying they're going to win this game.
They're going to win
outright.
Now,
Yeah.
let's go back to our side wager. I have an idea.
Yeah.
The loser.
You
of
pull
this-
us up on camera there, Mr. Dano.
The loser of this Miami, North Carolina pick
Yeah.
has to wear a Mets hat for the next podcast
Oh, during the playoffs,
during the playoffs.
the entire podcast.
And I know where we can get a Mets hat.
That's too small. we have a short little troll guy that he roots for the Mets here, so we will get a regular sized cap, and we will wear that during the course of this podcast. That's dirty. It's dirty to wear that when the Phillies are in the playoffs.
I know, but you wanted a side bet, and I'm not going back
now.
to
By
hot
the way,
wings.
by next week, the Phillies or the Mets may be eliminated.
That's true. So then,
So,
who
doesn't
knows?
matter. I like that. It doesn't really have anything to do with the Miami North Carolina game. It doesn't. I like that we incorporate these playoffs. You're on. We shake
Let's
on
do
that
it.
right here on
Yep.
on
Can
the
we see
camera. Mets hat sitting here. You've never worn a Mets hat, have you?
I have never worn a Mets hat. In fact, that's one stadium I haven't been to yet. Normally, when I go to a baseball stadium, I get a hat.
Yeah.
I don't have one from them. I've been to Yankee Stadium, haven't been to Citi Field.
I like it, and remember, we still have our friendly wager pie in the face bet
Yes.
for our overall record, which remains tight. I'm 3 back, but that's fun. Okay, Miami, North Carolina, it's on you.
It's on.
The loser of that bet has to wear a Mets hat the entire podcast next week. That's a good one. I like that. So I came up with a wing bet. You came up with that. We're just doing this on the fly, and that's fun stuff.
It's fun stuff. And again, it's fun. It's weird in a way that we have to worry about Penn State, we have to worry about the Eagles, and now we have to worry about the Phillies. It's a good
It's a
time
good October.
in Pennsylvania sports.
It is. All right. Our thanks to Mr. David Shiner. He is the audio engineer here today. And we also want to say thank you to Dan. Let's remind folks how they can get us again.
I was just going to say, I'm pulling up the board now. You can find us on all of your podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and YouTube. Like, subscribe. We love hearing from you. The YouTube is ABC 27 News, so
Yep.
look us up there.
Look us up there. You can search Weather Wagers, and of course, next week you'll want to check that out because one of us will be wearing that.
One
New
of
York
us will
Mets
be wearing
hat.
a Mets hat, and again, it'll be a first for me if that happens.
No doubt. All right, Dan. Thanks. That is Weather Wagers for this week. Enjoy your football weekend, everybody. We will see you right back here next week.